How's it going, guys? I'm Theo Joe, and today we're going to go over something that the internet companies definitely do not want you to know how to do, and that is how to get free internet for life. Basically, we're going to use our home network and configure it in a way that tricks your internet service provider into thinking that there's not really anything connected to it and not using any bandwidth, as well as getting the maximum speed from your internet service provider available, all for free. And the great thing about this method is that it should work with any internet service provider around the world because they all basically work the same. So whether you live in the United States or elsewhere, you should be able to also follow this tutorial. If you're a little bit skeptical, let me go over a little bit of background so you can understand how this is going to work. It's actually rather simple. You see, the reason that your internet service provider has to charge you for bandwidth, in addition to being a company in the first place, is that sending information and giving you bandwidth and sending that to your computer takes quite a bit of energy. And obviously, giving you higher speeds takes more energy than lower tiers, so that's why they charge you more, and quite a bit more in some cases. And that's also why, in some regions, the internet prices are much higher because it takes a lot more energy to send across weaker infrastructures. But the important thing to know is that most of the cost incurred from your plan has to do just with the energy usage of you yourself, not the entire infrastructure, because they've already priced that in across all the customers. So it doesn't really matter how much energy is being used, for example, from the ISP headquarters and backbone to your neighborhood hub, but rather simply from your neighborhood hub to your house and to your devices. In other words, most of the cost from any internet plan is actually due to the energy required for sending that information from your modem provided by your internet service provider to your router or other computers and devices on your network. And because of this fact, the only information that your internet service provider tracks about your household and network usage has to do with what comes after its modem, not anything before. So, if we can somehow figure out a way to reduce or maybe even eliminate the energy required used by our home network, then it will look like to the ISP that line was totally disconnected, and our home will essentially be invisible to the ISP. Therefore, their automatic system will stop charging you because it will look like there's nothing there even connected to that line. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And it really is very easy. It shouldn't take more than a couple minutes of work and then a little bit of patience on top of that. To get started, you're only going to need a few things lying around your house. First of all, the Ethernet cable that goes from your modem provided by the ISP to your router, or in the case of one of those combined modem routers provided by them, you'll need, unfortunately, every Ethernet cable going from that to all the devices on your network. You're also going to need 2 flashlights, either incandescent or LED, a retro encabulator, and optional is a Geiger counter. Now that you have everything, let's go through the step-by-step process of what you need to do, and then we can go over exactly why and the scientific reason behind how this works. It should be pretty interesting. The first thing you need to do is take the Ethernet cable and then the 2 flashlights and shine 1 flashlight into each end of the Ethernet cable for about 1 minute in order to pre-energize it. It doesn't have to be exactly 1 minute, but this is about what I found to work the best. After that 1 minute has elapsed, you want to quickly attach one end of the Ethernet cable to the retro encabulator, and then the other end to the accompanying bandwidth delimiter that should have come with your retro encabulator. It's important to use both because one of them makes it so almost no energy is used by the cable, and the other one optimizes it so that you'll be able to get the maximum bandwidth and speed available from your ISP. As a bit of a tangent, you might be interested to know that these retro encabulators didn't always used to be handheld. In fact, you used to have to take them to a dedicated company who would have some that were almost as big as the room, kind of like old computers, and you would have to give it to them for a few days. They would do the whole process, so it's very nice that these retro encabulators are now available as something that can fit in your pocket. Not super important, but I thought I would throw that in there. At this point, you can begin the automatic diagnostic routine and make sure that there are no initial errors. And afterwards, the rest should be fine. If there's gonna be a problem, it'll only be in the first few seconds. You can then leave this until it's finished, which shouldn't take more than 24 hours. You'll have to be a little bit patient, but it's definitely worth the payoff. After this process is complete, you can disconnect it and then store the cable in a warm, bright place for about 12 hours in order to keep it energized during the final transformation. You don't really have to think too much about this. Putting it below a regular light bulb like a lamp works fine. Just make sure it's not going to be too hot to melt the cable, so you don't want to be putting this under a heat lamp or anything. That's just ridiculous. After this waiting period, you should ideally check whether the cable has any residual radiation using your Geiger counter. If there's anything more than about 100 millisieverts, I would let it sit in a lead-lined box for about 12 more hours. But if there's no more problems, you can go ahead and replace the Ethernet cable back to where it was. Or in the case of needing to do this multiple times, you can replace all the Ethernet cables at once. In most cases, you won't be able to notice any visual difference while plugging the cable back in, although in the case where your ISP has a very fast maximum speed cap available, such as 1 gigabit per second, even if you weren't subscribed to that before, you may notice a slight glow of the cable, which is kind of fun. Besides that though, there's not really any way to tell right away whether or not you're getting the free internet. You'll have to simply wait for the ISP's bill to arrive, since most of this happens on the back end that you're not exposed to. But if nothing went wrong, then you're almost guaranteed for it to have worked. Now, before I show you the results, let's quickly go over and explain how exactly this works. It's actually pretty cool. You see, Ethernet cables that are mass-produced, which are basically all of them, typically use copper internally, which means they're cheap, but they do have a lot of electrical imperfections. For example, the electrons are not really polarized. This increases the resistance of the cable, meaning it requires a lot more voltage and energy to transmit information through them. When we shine the flashlights into the cable, it pre-energizes those electrons. And this is great, but it doesn't last long, only a few days tops. So we use the retroencabulator to trap them in this energized state by polarizing them. Then the bandwidth delimiter can come in and fill in any gaps with more polarized electrons. Then the result is a supercharged cable where the information can pass effortlessly. And with the electron gaps filled in, that means that almost maximum bandwidth can be transferred through it, in addition to it requiring less energy. So that's why we can get the maximum bandwidth of the ISP. Nothing is holding it all back. Now, obviously, it's against the laws of physics to 100% remove all the resistance in the cable. It just can't be done. But there will be only a tiny bit left. So the ISP will see such a lower amount of resistance that they'll just assume that it's an anomaly and that there's nothing actually connected to it. And when the next month's bill comes around, you can see, like my example here, it should say that you have a $0 charge. Now, you may see it say something along the lines of no service connected, but don't worry, they're not going to disconnect you now because they already think it's disconnected, and that's why they're not charging you anything. So you're basically getting free bandwidth. Obviously, if your internet service provider does have a bandwidth cap, wait to verify that this actually worked before going and downloading a whole bunch of stuff, because if it didn't, you don't want to go over that cap. So just be sure to double check before you do anything crazy. But if it did work for you, you can finally enjoy the internet speed you've always wanted. So I hope this worked for you guys. If it did, be sure to let us know down in the comments. I'd love to hear how much this worked out for you and what speed you ended up getting. If you want to keep watching, I'll put some other videos right here. You can just click on those. And if you want to subscribe, I make a few new videos every week, so it should be worth it. And also be sure to enable notifications by clicking the bell next to the subscribe button, or YouTube's garbage algorithm might not even show you new videos even if you do subscribe. Keep that in mind. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.